Hello?
I I just turned on the recording, so it'd be kind of fun to capture this.
Okay,
So
so how do I, so how, oh,
you're talking about how you
yeah,
celebrated
I see,
Christmas, right?
says got it. All right.
Sorry about that.
So you're talking about how you celebrated Christmas, right? Growing up?
Well, yes, and then we ate supper, and then the next thing we did was go to confession and come home, and then went to midnight mass. And after midnight mass, we came home and opened the presents. And
Wow.
then we get to bed about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the adults would sleep, and the kids would be up at 6 going through their gifts.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yep. Yep. Well, you didn't do that with your own kids with good reason, right?
Yeah. Things changed by then,
Yeah.
Christmas became much more materialistic,
Right.
and it hasn't stopped yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I do recall going to midnight mass a few times.
Yeah,
Yep.
we went to midnight mass even when I was in high school and beyond, often, but then it was uh, the family started opening Christmas presents in the morning, and we often took dates to midnight mass.
Nice. Nice. Yep, that's quite the invitation, right? For a date. It's
Yeah, right.
that's a
Well,
pretty date.
That was pretty
you get,
special, I suppose.
in those days they didn't give you ultra wine, so you didn't have to worry about getting out of order.
Yep. They didn't breathalyze people leaving the mass, huh?
Right.
Yep, that makes for a good, pretty safe date. Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
So, just checking on holidays, like, were there any particular German holidays that you celebrated, or did you integrate just some?
Well, right, like last week was St. Nicholas, and we always celebrated St. Nicholas. My grandmother would knit mittens and stuff like that and send it over, and we had a stocking, and they filled it with candy and that type of thing.
Nice. Good. So you got a little preview for that, huh?
Yeah, that was in the first week of December that occurred.
And Saint Nicholas is German, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
So
Go ahead.
then, other than that, I guess we just celebrated the normal holidays that everybody celebrates. Can't think of anything that was special to any ethnic group, or as far as I was concerned.
How about German dishes? What were your favorite German dishes?
Spare ribs and sauerkraut, uh, uh, chicken sour stew, dumplings and sauerkraut. Then the usual German dishes like Wiener Schnitzel, but we never had Wiener Schnitzel as a kid, or rouladen. I guess that they were too fancy. But we had salts. We had salts every Christmas.
And what's that?
Head cheese, pig head cheese.
Oh, lucky
Piece
you.
of- well, I like salts, but my dad was big in ethnic foods at Christmas time. He would have his glass of buttermilk, and then he would have lutefisk, that is Scandinavian friends would bring to him, and what else did he have? Something else that they brought to him, but
Lutefisk is pickled herring, or is it something else?
it's a fish that's been cured in lye.
Hmm.
I didn't like it. I didn't like buttermilk either.
Yeah, so those didn't continue, right? Yeah. And then how did you decide to have Christmas Eve with us instead of Christmas Day?
I guess we could organize it better.
Hmm. Hmm.
We reversed what I did. We went to mass on the evening because they started to have 4 and 5 o'clock masses, and then to come home after that and have it was easier than trying to do it the way I did it, and I couldn't see all the kids up going to midnight mass,
Yeah, yeah.
especially
And
at younger ages.
I remember staying up. I remember one time seeing you go by in the hall with presents and stuff. So
Yeah.
there's that risk too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And your grandma's around? Would she celebrate with you all the holidays and stuff like that? Was she
No,
nearby?
my grandmother didn't spoke little English, and she pretty much where she lived with my uncle on the farm through everything. I don't recall of even having her in our house.
Oh yeah, yeah. So you'd see her when you go to the farm, but
Yeah,
you
yeah.
would you try to communicate with her, or was it just kind of clear that
Well, yeah, you try to communicate, but I couldn't speak German, and she could speak little English. All my cousins on the farm where she lived could speak German because they learned it from her, but so that limited the visiting time.
right, right? And I think you said back then they were kind of intentional and not about not teaching the language to the kids. Is that right?
Well, in my if you didn't have somebody speaking German living with you, yeah, it wasn't taught. I never learned German at all.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So there was no intentional, let's make sure all the kids and grandkids learn German and that kind of
No,
stuff.
no.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was thinking today if we could look at just some of like the more historical events. You know, you talked about World War II and what that was like in your town and in your community and things like that. You mentioned when we had that February 14th one a few years ago about knowing about the Spanish flu because you knew of people that were affected by that.
I really, the Spanish flu was mostly prevalent during the First World War, long
Right.
before I was born.
But you
But
knew,
then, well, yes, because it was like COVID. Everybody knew about it and continued to talk about it for years and years after because it killed so many people.
yeah. And was that true like with TB in your time too? Because they
Well,
didn't.
that was a big scourge too, because during the period of the 30s and into the 40s, tuberculosis was around until they found a vaccine for it. And even if we had the vaccine, like my oldest first cousin, Mary Albers, she was a freshman at Marquette in 1946 and got it and died from it.
Oh wow. Yeah. So it's still,
So it still was around for some people to get, but it wasn't nearly as prevalent as it was in the 30s and early 40s because they even
yeah.
had to build sanatoriums at that time for people to go to so they can be isolated from the general population.
Wow. And you had it and you were checked. How were you checked regularly?
They use a needle to put it into your arm, and they inserted something, and if you got a reaction from that, they knew that you were exposed or you had some slight indications of it, and then it would be followed. That would be followed by a chest X-ray to confirm that it was not a problem.
And you were never symptomatic?
No, just that reaction.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So the other things that I was thinking about with history were things like civil rights. We were really small at the time. And so we didn't really, I remember a few things about it, but what was that like, that time period like?
Well, when I was living at home in Menominee, it was never an issue because we had no people of color, either in Menominee or Marinette. Well, I take that back. There was one black person in Marinette,
Wow.
and there was one Jewish family in Marinette. So it just, we would only see a number of African Americans when the carnival would come into town or the circus in the summer.
So
But
what did you think about that? What was the town's feeling about all that?
we were so far away from it that it was never talked about.
Yeah. And then the big civil rights movement in like the 60s, I was a kid when that happened. What was that like in Brookfield or in your experience?
Well, in the Milwaukee area, they had marches, and one of the main leaders was Father Grappi, and he would lead marches across the 16th Street Bridge, or in the 6th Street Bridge, to the south side, because most of the blacks lived on the north side, and there weren't any to speak of on the south side. So he would lead it over the Menominee River Valley into the south side, which was predominantly white during the protests.
How did that go?
Well, there there were people out against the marches, but not to any, as I recall, great extent. But that led into the killing of Dr. Martin Luther King, which ended up in the blacks rioting in Milwaukee.
That's right. Yeah.
And I know my last day of work for Allstate Insurance in 1967, I got in a car and was driving along Menominee River Parkway to go downtown to work, and I got stopped. And they said, "You can't go any further." I said, "What's going on?" They said, the blacks are rioting downtown and it's completely closed off. So I had to turn around and go back home.
Yeah, they had a curfew for a while, right? Because I remember
Yeah, they called out the National Guard,
Wow.
not the Air National Guard, the Army National Guard, and yes, he put into effect a curfew. And the rioting lasted about, if I recall, about 3-4 days.
And where was the rioting, downtown or?
Well, down in the near north side downtown,
Mhm.
down in the east side, the northeast side is where almost all of the blacks lived.
Yeah. And what was the general perception at that time? Or what did you think about at that time?
What did I think about it? I thought my thinking was that they had to get it under control so
Mhm.
that they could start working on the issues that are raised.
Yeah, yeah. And the issues that they were working on were
Well,
which one?
all the segregation issues that existed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember, I remember pieces of that and stuff. Someone once told me, I think later, I'd been Father John, that Father Grappi was marching people because he said, I want people to see that your families, I want people in white districts to see you as don't stay shut up in your homes in fear, come out and show them that your families and your people, respectable people. But that's just a piece that I think Father John told me about. Um, but and that curfew lasted for a while, right? Did it last for a
Yeah,
while? Or?
it probably lasted, I don't remember exactly how long, but I would guess it was up to 2 weeks.
Up to 2 weeks? Yeah. And just the other thing I remember is both you and Mom were very supportive of people getting their rights and things like that. Um, Not so much in when I went to school with other kids and things like that. And I just wonder how you had that sense of understanding about that.
Well, because part of it is uh, neither of us were ever prejudiced to any extent because we were never exposed. I believe that people who are prejudiced learn it from their parents
Mhm. Yeah,
primarily.
yeah,
And again, going back to Menominee and Peshtigo, it wasn't an issue, so it never became a topic of conversation even.
yeah, yeah. And you were also living in a multicultural town, from what you said. You had immigrants from many different places, all kind of white European, but
Yeah,
yeah.
the only ethnic group that we didn't have, and I used to kid Carmela about that, we didn't want any Italians, so we didn't have any.
And why was that? What was the perception at the time?
Well, it was the Italians went to Iron Mountain.
Oh,
In other words, when they migrated, they tended to ethnic groups tended to stay together,
yeah.
and they just went up to Iron Mountain where there were some mines and stuff. So you'll find in the Upper Peninsula, most of the Italians are around Hurley and Iron Mountain, where the copper mining was and stuff like that.
And they were the more recent immigrants, right? Like
Well,
you.
they came over probably at the same time. There was a big exodus into the United States in the early 1890s, and I think a good share of them came over at that time. And I don't know how we had Irish people living in Menominee, and we had an Irish Catholic church, but I don't know why the Irish came into the area. I do know that the Germans and the Polish and those were farmers in Europe, so they tended to come over and uh, uh, seek out farmland to continue farming over here, where the Italians, for instance, you found them mostly in large cities.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Yeah. And Sherry and John talked a little bit about what was going on in Germany when your family your great grandfather came.
well, Germany also had military conscription for the small wars that were going on around then.
Mhm. And that started some migration, right?
And that started it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a piece of history I don't really know a whole lot about, but yeah. 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 And then the other thing that happened when I was very young was when they killed John F. Kennedy, JFK. What was going on at the time? What do you
Well,
know?
JFK was after the Russians came over to plant missiles in Cuba.
Mhm.
And the Bay of Pigs and that type of thing conflict. And we had a big confrontation with Russia over that. That was the Russians decided that they would not do that. And then JFK, you can go to the library and find at least 24 books on the conspiracy theories about the killing of JFK.
Yep. Still unsolved. But he was the first Catholic president. Do you remember a big deal being about that as a Catholic or in the church or anything?
Well, he was the first Catholic president nominee that was elected. In 1929, there was Al Smith, who was also Catholic, who was defeated. But the overall national attitudes towards Catholic had changed drastically from 1929 to the time that Kennedy was elected. I think it was in 1960 or 1962. I forget which.
Yeah. I
So,
remember. Yeah, that was.
yeah, the mainline Protestants always were convinced that if they elected a Catholic president, the Pope would tell them what to do. So
That's great. I didn't realize that. Yeah. Yep. So, what other big world events come to mind as that you lived through?
well, let's see. Born in 1928, so the first thing I lived through was the Depression, then the Second World War, and then the Korean War, and then the Vietnam War, and dust-ups. But that was the main thing insofar as wartime. Other than that, besides the race riots, I'm trying to think of, there were other protests and so forth all along the way for various type things. But that's pretty much, I think, the National Guard was called up for the Berlin crisis, which was when Russia in Berlin stopped the European countries from supplying the three countries that are Allied countries that occupied Berlin, along with the Russians. They stopped coal from being shipped into Berlin. So there was a big confrontation over that, and then the National Guard was called up in case it went further, but they had what they called the Berlin Airlift, and they used aircraft to fly in the coal supplies. So
Mm-hmm. So the
that
national,
broke the restriction that the Russians put into effect.
Yeah. And then kind of, looking at all that, I think you and I talked about this one time, but there's a Martin Luther King quote saying that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. But it seems like some of the things that were, advanced in your lifetime or in our lifetime are now being back, questioned. So how do you see, like, is it the arc bending towards justice, or is it what happens with all this stuff that's going on?
What you're asking about is world history.
Yeah.
In world history, there have been confrontations, wars, you name it, all the way through, and it's an ebb and flow type of situation that it comes and it goes. Countries get power and take over a large part of or several countries and so forth. So I'm coming to the conclusion that the humans in their DNA have a link to that type of confrontation periodically, and it allows autocrats to get power and try to subjugate other countries to their way of thinking and living, and it goes on and on. And we're going through it again in the United States, but other parts of the world, we have, in some respects, the United States has been isolated during a lot of confrontations. Africa has had civil wars and confrontation between countries as well as other areas. All the while that the periods where we haven't had a fighting war.
Yeah, on our grounds at least. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's, I think you'd find it hard to go and find any period of time where some countries somewhere in the world weren't having confrontations.
Yeah. And what helps? What's the antidote, or what can we do now as like what in your experience helps with all that?
Well, it helps to have countries that are strong that can help prevent that type of thing,
Mhm.
and countries who are willing to get together and maintain the peace, either through military strength or monetary assistance and so forth.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's NATO has kept Europe free from large conflicts, but you still have the Middle East, but that's not Europe, and Africa, and in Far East, different countries who are constantly trying to get, one group is trying to get superiority over another group.
So like alliances around human rights and around good governance and things like that.
Well, and climate control and the whole thing.
Mhm.
If you can get people to buy into doing something about it, and that's, of course, after the Second World War, the European countries knew that they could never really trust other countries that had a different form of government, like the communists, from trying to take over other countries, and so you had to band together to set up a system where you could maintain your own peace. So
Yeah. And now, like internally in our country, you know, it's a critical time. Like what helps, what would help now, you know, internally, and or us as people or communities, or, you know, as a nation, what kind of what kind of things help in difficult times?
educating people and forming uh, uh, groups and coalitions and parties and whatever to offset whatever you're seeing as a threat to the democracy of the country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like your group in Nevada, right?
Well, you mean Nevada's for the common good?
Yeah.
You know, but that was all for social good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It wasn't political at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
But in this country today, the danger is that moderates no longer have an effective voice in governing. On one side, you have extremes that tend to an autocracy, and on the other side, you have extremes that tend towards socialism. And the middle have not been affected at all, or effective at all lately, because people hardly talk to each other.
Yeah. So you see education as key to, as some of the pieces that, and then working together
Yeah,
kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
education about the history of the country and the Constitution and all that type of thing.
Mhm. Yeah. And the news has changed a lot since in your
Oh,
lifetime, right? Tell us about that, how that has evolved
well,
or
you,
devolved.
yeah, what you have is uh, in a capitalistic country, unless well regulated, it can go amok. And with free speech and people becoming extreme in their viewpoints, the and the freedom of the press, capitalists in the publishing business saw an opportunity to make a lot of advertising dollars by zeroing in to news programs that cater to a certain segment or another, and and as a result, they cater to them, and the publisher or the owner of the TV networks and so forth uh, uh, made a lot of money. If the advertisers wouldn't support that, you see them go away pretty fast.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, in some cases, they do serve a purpose because they do, uh, depending on what their philosophy is, they do point out uh, weaknesses in the system and uh, areas in the system and people in the system who are trying to uh, subjugate one type of people or another type of people so that they can make more money.
Yeah.
So it's you have to be totally vigilant, and And it isn't only, for instance, the unions in this country were very important to the rise of the working man. But then the unions that were responsible for that allowed people to come in and corrupt the unions.
Mhm.
So what was a good thing became a bad thing in certain areas.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, the moneyed interests, right?
Yeah, well, the money and power,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, and or both.
Mhm.
Like your congressmen, they don't make a ton of money, like billions of dollars, but they have a ton of power.
Mhm. 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 Right.
And they get in and corrupt the system because they want to gain ever more power to be able to push the system in whatever direction their beliefs are.
Mhm. Yep. Hold on to that power regardless, huh?
Yeah, well, yeah, some people don't really care about making billions of dollars because they can get what they're after through just uh, 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 controlling the power of the area they're in.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of what you said about values, like your values, right? And I wanted to just circle back to that because unfortunately it was like at the end of that conversation, but I think you said, you have an order, God, family, community, and kind of the common good. Could you talk about that a little bit more again? Because it was kind of fast at the last thing of like, what are the values that have guided you through your life? And I think it applies to these times as well, but
Well, I can give you my beliefs and my values.
yeah.
Number one, as I said, is God. I do believe in a God, and I do believe in Christianity.
Mhm.
Now, secondly, I believe in family. I think the family is a building block of a functioning, fair society, and having a family that's loving and supportive of each other is key to establishing and continuing uh, values for the common good generally. And then the third is I believe in in the United States as a democracy and the Constitution that was set up. Unfortunately, humans are involved in all this stuff, and humans are not perfect in any of those areas except for the top one, which is not human.
Yeah.
Uh, and you have the various weaknesses in human beings coming in. But the most important thing is that you take action. For instance, I believe in the capitalistic system, but a well-regulated capitalistic system.
Mm.
And I think a well-regulated capitalistic system is a one of the best economic systems in in the world, as long as they have as one of their main principles that they're doing it for the common good.
And could you say what you mean by the common good?
That what you're doing is for the benefit of all people in all classes, in all races, in all ethnic groups.
Mhm. Mhm.
So if you pass legislation, it should first be for the common good and it could be for a specific area, but that area should be one that is what will be something that is for the common good, not only for that particular group or organization or company or what have you.
Yeah.
And I also believe that that in the Constitution it says everybody's created equal, and that's to I look at to be everybody should be treated equally by the government. But on the other hand, everybody is not created equal. Certain people or all people are given gifts of various types, and some people are given lesser economic or physical and so forth gifts, but that doesn't mean that they do not have an overall gift to be able to do things within their own capability for the betterment of all. And those who have been given more in the way of a gift have the responsibility to hone those gifts and develop those gifts so that they can participate in the overall world for the common good, not just for themselves. And I firmly believe that there's a just God, and the just God expects everybody to give through their gifts time, talent, and treasure for the benefit of all. And I believe that those that have the most have the obligation to give to the least, so that they will have a basic standard of living and not have to sacrifice because one group is all powerful or more groups are all powerful and corral all the economic and power. And where the justice comes in, I feel that people who don't generally follow that, there will be a time when that'll be sorted out by a just Almighty God. Otherwise, I look at it, why do we even try to do everything to be an upstanding, ethical person?
So, yeah, and you've certainly practiced that,
Well, again, I'll go back to my original. Nobody is perfect. And the human being has to realize that when you're not perfect, it's incumbent upon you to fix whatever the incident or the actions or anything that where you weren't perfect, so that you can get back on the straight and narrow, as they call it. That doesn't mean you can't have fun. That doesn't mean that you can't have fun and socialize and what have you, because you can. So that is in a rough, very rough form. With my, I don't, as I think I told you once, for instance, that a nation should never do for the people what they can't do for themselves. But by the same token, the nation should do for people that can't do for themselves to help them along the way when it's not, their condition is not resulting from something that they are not doing.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I remember you telling us when we were growing up, just because people don't have a lot, aren't making a lot of money doesn't mean they're stupid, you know. And I remember different kind of like reminders that, you know, everyone's got gifts to give, and, you know, that how we need to really take care of each other, right?
Yeah. One thing that really irritates me when somebody says, well, it's their own fault that they would work as hard as I did. They wouldn't have that problem. Well, the person talking to me is a dentist or a doctor or someone who's, or a famous person, all who have been given gifts far and above what that person that they're blaming for being a victim did not get.
Yep. Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think this country puts far the people, because they have become famous or have attained positions, on a pedestal
Mhm.
where they should not be. They should be admired for the fact that they did take their gifts and did develop them to be be able to entertain people, to make money for people, whatever. But beyond that, there are many people without those particular gifts who are leading a lot better life for the common good than they are.
Yeah. So the converse, that just because you're rich and famous doesn't mean you know everything, and that you, right? Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it's and it's just and people, there's too much envy and of people who have a lot, and uh, too much of people trying, being dissatisfied with their life because they are making all that money somebody else's who has 10 homes that they don't need and 50 cars they don't need, and there's other, and they do, and some of those people are those who say, I earned this, it's mine. Uh, those people should get off their butt and do something so that they can get some money.
Yeah. Yep.
And admiring them with the money that they get and the values that they have is corrupting.
Right. Right. Yep. Yep. It feeds the whole system, right?
Yeah.
So what for you, what brings about happiness?
What brings about happiness? Well, one thing is to have a loving family or support group that you can relate to, and be with as a basic thing. The other is the most important thing to bring happiness is to help others.
Hmm.
You'll get the most satisfaction and happiness if you help others and can see that others are able to overcome whatever they're struggling with.
Yeah.
And the other thing is happiness is using your talents and your treasure and your time for the common good.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. I see that. I see that in your life, Dad.
Believe me, I'm not on a pedestal by a long shot.
Yep. Well, we're not doing that, right?
And
I
I don't
like,
want to be on a pedestal.
yeah. Yeah, I liked when I would ask you, I tell people when I ask you, Dad, how did you do it with 8 kids? And you would say, sometimes we didn't. Yeah, and you worked with kids so much of your life, through the schools and raising your own kids and things like that. What's important about raising kids or care of kids?
That's a hard thing to answer because you have to work with your own background.
Mm.
But it's important is to give them a value system that they can live a good life by.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then know enough to get out of their way when they are adults and are able to guide their own life.
Do you have like a scar across your tongue for how many times you've had to bite it?
You mean you never notice that the end of my tongue is off?
It's not just a scar, it's gone, huh? Yeah, that's great. I also wanted to ask you about health. What are some of still so healthy, right? Like, what are some of the components about living a healthy life? What contributes to that?
I guess it started out with that. I started out with, of all things, monetary security.
Mm-hmm.
I was determined to be able to live a comfortable life
Mm-hmm.
until I die,
Mm-hmm.
materially. No, but and also then I went into, well, what good is that if physically and mentally you're not what you could be?
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of went into that and did things that I read about or was told about or doctors told me about to live a lifestyle that would promote that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Nancy,
Yeah,
did you? Oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
Sorry.
And was fortunate in that it has worked out to a certain degree well for me, but I say I'm fortunate and blessed because a lot of people have issues that they have to deal with that no matter what they did, it wouldn't have overcome those issues. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, many things you get or are exposed to that are out of your control.
Yeah. Yeah. Nancy, did you have questions as you hear this? Oops, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Pardon?
I'm asking Nancy if she has a question, but she's on mute, so she's getting off mute.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. I think I just wanted to thank Dad for just being such a role model and such an inspiration. And I think I've learned so many lessons throughout life from you. So I just wanted to
Well,
say that.
thank you. I'm glad you did. But I'm glad you didn't pick up the bad things either.
I don't know what those were. I had enough of my own bad things. So
Are there other things you want to share, Dad? Anything you want to
Yeah,
say?
yeah.
Yeah.
Please don't print this without editing it.
You're uneditable, Dad. Yeah, no, I just have so much gratitude. Thank you for taking the time to do all this. I know it's not the best medium to do this, with Zoom and everything else like that, but there's so much more beyond all of this, but it's just so good to have it all captured and to be able to share that. And certainly my kids know so many things from you and then from me, but to be able to share as much as possible with them always. They say to each other, fight nice, kids. So they have a lot of grandpa-isms as well.
Well,
So
throughout my life, I've had a lot of role models and a lot of help. So whatever I've become, the good things I've become is because of the good people and the love I've gotten from all those who I've been in contact with.
yeah, we're all
And the support from my religious beliefs and from my family.
yeah. Yep, that's what we're all here for, right?
Yep. And
Yes.
when I look at all of you as a family, I look at all the good things and I say, see, they are taking after me. And then when I see the bad things, I say, where'd they ever get that?
Could have been, it must have been someone else.
But fortunately, it's both overwhelmingly good, so I haven't had to think about it a lot.
Yeah, well, good. Yeah, and where you see the other stuff, you can keep whittling away at your tongue.
Well, what I would say would not necessarily be better than what the individual or a group of individuals are doing. I would just be comparing it to what I experienced, and the net result may be that you all knew more, but you know more than I do. So, because
Yeah. Yeah, you've been sparing on advice. You just live by example. And one of what I say about you is that you don't give advice, but when you ask a question, then I stop and say, oh, this is important. Like one of the great things, one of the great directional changes for me was when I was going to take French in high school. I don't know if you remember that. And you asked, where do you think you might be able to actually use that? And what's the language that you could actually use? And I ended up taking Spanish, and now I use it every day, and it's a huge part of my, career and trajectory and life experience, right?
okay, put that down and say he was right about one thing.
Yeah. And also the role of humor is also good with having kids. I remember a lot of the taking things lightly that helped, right?
Yeah, that's one area that I personally feel I fall down in a. I tend to sometimes take events or things too seriously.
Mm.
And that can be a problem.
Yeah.
So I came up with, read about it, and I came up with a saying, don't sweat the small stuff.
So we should let you get to your fans, Dad.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all this time, and really appreciate you being able to spend some time on this, although you spent a lifetime on it. So thank you.
Well, you can put it in the archives someplace, and when you have a party, you can take out one and have a few good laughs.
We never have parties in our family. You know that, Dad.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you so much.
All right. Thanks so much, Dad. Take care. Thanks, Nancy,
Take
for
care.
setting
Yep.
this all up. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Alice. And thanks,
Great.
Dad.
God bless, and I love you all.
Yep, love you as well.
Love you too, Dad.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.